I'm gonna use my abilities. I'm gonna seance in with my other half. I'm gonna can you feel me?
Why would you summon me?
What? Oh, he's still in pain. I'll make it quick.
Dude.
After 3 years starting in the tail end of 2019, I finally made it to the last video in my series of thoughts videos covering RWBY Volume 6. It has been quite the journey to get here in 2 volumes, a spin-off side series, a video game, and a bunch of announcements and controversies have passed since. I feel this has somewhat been the best set of videos I've made while also being the most experimental, especially with the previous 2 design videos. This video will be getting into a lot of different aspects about Adam, the White Fang, Jaune Pyrrha, Cinder Neo, and some other miscellaneous topics I haven't covered yet before getting into my concluding thoughts about Volume 6. So let's start with the proverbial bull and talk about Adam. When it comes to the Adam character short, I really didn't have any expectations going into it. This is mainly due to how the end of Volume 5 handled Adam. The action was just so poorly done that it ruined any excitement I had for Adam's involvement in the series from then on. I previously said how I feel this is more of a response to how the audience reacted to Adam at the end of Volume 5, but with the context of Volume 6, I understand why they made this since they are going to have Adam die by the end of the volume. There are things I now find at least a little interesting while also being majorly confused of others. That confusion is what I'm going to talk about. The short starts off with a scene in which Adam is putting on his iconic Grim mask for the first time, as he and a group of Faunus move to break into an unknown building. Without any context or anything else to explain what this is about and where or when this is even taking place, my assumptions were that this is shortly after Sienna Khan took over the White Fang, the group is executing one of their early violent raids on a deserving target, and Adam is donning the mask as a way to symbolize this new direction of the White Fang. But then, the scene cuts forward to Ghira, Sienna, Ilya, and Adam, along with a group of White Fang members looking like their Terrorist Volume 1 selves, being attacked by a group of humans, which caused me to look back at the previous scene and now wonder what the hell that was even about, since it is now very clearly to not be during Sienna's rule over the White Fang. What also perplexes me is Ilya's inclusion in this scene. Ghira may look younger, but Ilya and Adam don't, which causes me to ask how old either of them are when Blake should be 12 years old at most, since the change of hands between Ghira and Sienna over the White Fang took place about 5 years before the start of the series. What perplexes me about this is how Ilya doesn't need to be here, and has a good point of introduction later on in the short. There is one thing I want to point out about Adam's design throughout this short, which is how Adam's clothing doesn't have all the decals we first see him with for the Black trailer up to Volume 3. These missing details get added as the short progresses. Unfortunately, I don't have the analysis skills and knowledge necessary to even guess at what each addition means in relation to Adam and the story progression of this short. I'm going to need to jump back to my statement about the White Fang members in this scene looking like their Terrorist Volume 1 selves and back it up. I say this because of how them still having the mask and the same uniform we've seen them wear this entire time still gives off the idea that they are a violent underground organization. Yes, they have a different set of colors in the Ghira-led White Fang logo, but these changes are not enough to remove what their garments are known for in the series due to how these changes don't significantly change how they look or can be interpreted. If you want an example of how this can be achieved, check out the edit Rebel Taxi did to the main character's outfit for Final Space to better communicate how he is supposed to be under military confinement due to the illegal actions he took to impress a girl. That said, the hooded uniform and the Grim masks would honestly need to be the major removals of their Ghira-led member designs, as these are the major contributors to why they look violent or worrisome. I honestly don't know why they are wearing the Grim mask at this stage of the White Fang while under Ghira's leadership. Like, Ghira makes known how he wants the Faunus and his organization to be seen back in Volume 5 and at the tail end of this scene. So why does he let them wear something that goes completely against that? You see why this is so confusing? I don't understand how anything connects to the previously known history of the White Fang movement in Remnant. I got Two last talking points for this scene that will be a sort of tangent away from my confusion for this short, which are Gira and what I consider to be the most horribly written moment in the entire series. For Gira, it's about how stupidly passive he is when it came to handling the racist humans who were trying to kill him and his followers. I think this is just a portrayal of his flaw as a character that was initially introduced in Volume 5 during his speech to the people of Menagerie. That being how he is, in fact, a coward. Specifically when it comes to acknowledging and dealing with the many different forms of oppression his people have had to endure and be subjected to. This was shown when he basically sugarcoats all of that as unfair treatment, through how he initially responds to Ilya's outcry. Of course, I'm paraphrasing, but that is essentially what he said. Ilya then retorts by outlining all the horrible things that have been done to their people, which included hunting. His lack of properly acknowledging these forms of hate is what makes him a coward, and is why he isn't properly challenging the humans attacking him in this short. Now, what I consider to be the most horribly written moment in this scene in the entire series up to this point is the group of humans who just walk up to see the man Adam just killed and then refer to all the Faunus there as freaks. Why this is so bad is because of how these are people who just walk up from behind a group of trees just to say that and then run away. Why wasn't this any of the humans that Adam defeated earlier getting back up to see what he did to one of their own? The problem is how I can see the simplistic writing at play here. Adam kills the guy, people come in from stage left, calls Adam and by proxy everyone else in the White Fang a bad word, exit from where they came from, done. It's just very lazy writing. The last reason why I find this moment so poor is the word choice here with freaks. Based on what has been established from all the way back in Volume 2, monsters would have been a better choice since, Adam, Ilya, and all the other members of the White Fang are wearing the mask of monsters in this scene. To focus back up, the last bit of confusion I have for this short is how Adam ends the short by walking away and dropping his iconic mask to leave it behind. This has to be after his ordeal with Blake at Haven Academy. But what confuses me is that Adam returns to the White Fang afterwards in Volume 6 proper wearing the mask he dropped. I guess he went back to pick it up or got a new one. They could have just framed his shots by having his face be cut off by the top of the frame and have other shots be mainly from behind him. Of course, I do understand that they most likely did this because of how the short isn't the show proper, and people who didn't see it or have access to it would be confused and wonder what happened to the mask. But if him dropping the mask is a carefully shot, seemingly important moment, then he shouldn't have it anymore for Volume 6. With that, I now get to Adam for Volume 6. After losing basically everything, including the White Fang, thanks to his defeat by Blake and the Menagerie militia, Adam is left with one thing: Blake. For the initial episodes, Adam stalks Blake onto the Argus Limited train and then waits for her at the city of Argus. He doesn't make a move on her until he knows that she is alone and can't be swiftly rescued by her friends. I gotta say, I am really surprised by how much I liked this encounter after having no expectations or interest in Adam after Volume 5 that the Adam short didn't rectify. It mainly comes down to how tense these scenes are and how in control of the situation Adam is when fighting Blake on the antenna and through the woods. This is also backed by much better fight choreography than what we saw in Volume 5 for Adam and Blake. Of course, he gets more frustrated and angry as things progress, but this develops naturally throughout his fight with Blake. I seriously find it funny that people act like Adam was nerfed in Volume 6. Hello? Did you not see how their fight went in Volume 5? How about I break down how poor their fight went in those scenes? I'm also going to use this opportunity to talk about aspects of these scenes between Blake and Adam in Volume 5 that I didn't have the time to do so before when creating my Volume 5 Thoughts series. It starts off okay with Blake calling out Adam to draw his attention to her. One would question why Blake is standing up on the roof of one of the buildings. One would think this is just to have Blake in a cool position. But this is to better draw Adam's attention and support the artistic narrative that Blake is the one in control of the situation by being higher than Adam is. Height is an artistic tool to show authority that doesn't just happen in media, but in other forms of our everyday lives. RWBY has used height to emphasize authority all the way back in Volume 3 with how they shot Ironwood at low angles to give him a more commanding presence. One of my favorite examples of this in media that I was able to catch on to is the exchange between Professor Goodwitch and Professor Umbridge at a flight of stairs in the Harry Potter movie Order of the Phoenix. Professor Goodwitch had recently found out about the inhumane punishment Professor Umbridge subjected Harry to for his outburst in her classroom. As they give their assertions and defenses to one another's points, they each take a step up the flight of stairs they are next to. It isn't until Professor Umbridge leverages her stance by using her connections with the Ministry of Magic to cause Professor Goodwitch to back down and thus take a step back down the stairs they are on instead of up. This leaving Professor Umbridge to literally and figuratively stand unchallenged, and then things quickly get worse at Hogwarts. So with that, you should understand how Blake standing up on that roof is to emphasize her authority and control over the situation. She may have stood up there to call out Adam, but she doesn't respond to him when he makes his statement about Blake being there for him. Blake instead ignores Adam and addresses everyone in the White Fang. Blake doesn't actually address Adam until she drops down to his level to face him and tell him how it is over. Adam, realizing how much he is not in control of this situation like he expected, snaps on the first person who questions his actions. People would look at this and say Adam is acting out of character. I would say that we've never seen Adam in a situation where he has not only lost control, but has also been humiliated when he goes to detonate the bombs they set, only to find they were defused by Ilya before he could do so, further showing how arrogant and wrong he was to assume Blake being there only for him. Enraged, he attacks Blake. Blake sidesteps him and beats Adam over the head. In a last-ditch effort to regain control, he goes for chaos by commanding his forces to attack the Menagerie militia. This has been alright at best and passable at the very least. You can see what they are going for and it works to an extent. It is after this point, however, that things quickly dip in quality. Despite his actions to create chaos in order to regain control, Blake just completely ignores Adam and goes up to the main hall of Haven Academy for a few minutes to find her team there. She finally goes back to find Adam having done nothing during that time. This fight between Adam, Blake, and Sun is so boring in terms of choreography and shot composition. Adam first takes a swing at Sun, but the camera just cuts to a single of Sun. Sun in this shot is just swinging his gunchucks around and firing at Adam off screen. Therefore, Adam can literally be doing anything to block or not be harmed by Sun's attacks. We've seen before with Roman and Ilya how much Sun can steamroll his opponent if they don't respond adequately enough. With this shot, Adam doesn't have to. We finally get a cinematic move of the camera as it pans over to have Blake start exchanging swipes with Adam. But the shot is flat and their actions don't really tell an interesting story about how they are fighting one another. Also, their footwork is almost non-existent. Adam's motions look so awkward because it doesn't even look like he lifts his feet off the ground while swinging his blade at Blake. Blake at least has a sidestep, but this isn't much. This shot is also poorly composed for when Sun comes in to hit Adam in the head. His body is over Adam's, which makes it harder to see what Sun's attack does to Adam. This moment is also made less impactful by having Adam just immediately transition into running away in RWBY's version of the Naruto run, which we've seen them implement since Volume 3. What this all does is make Adam look ridiculous and pathetic, a pushover. This is the main contributor as to why I lost interest in Adam, as his skills and terrifying presence showcased up to Volume 3 and partly in Volumes 4 and 5 are not here. Adam was nerfed in Volume 5. Adam regained himself in Volume 6. I don't want to hear how his semblance field attack didn't do as much damage to Yane in Volume 6 as it did to the mech in the Black trailer. First off, Blake and Yang never dished out enough energy for Adam to absorb to complete an attack on a scale like that. And 2, Adam has let his anger get the better of him. We've known through Pyrrha and Weiss that one's emotions and mental state can harm one's control over their semblance. Imagine if Adam was in control of himself and compressed that energy at Yang into a single slice instead of letting it disperse over a blast wave. Now, let's get back to Adam for his confrontation with Blake. One of my favorite moments early on is when Blake moves to a different platform and turns around expecting Adam to be right behind her, and Adam punishes her by playfully shooting the blunt end of his weapon into her head and laughing at her for her wrong assumption. This just goes to show how in control of the situation Adam is, that he feels like he can spare the time to tease and or torment Blake. This even gets an alteration when Blake moves to another platform again to catch her breath, but Adam has already moved up there and starts choking her. Another one of the things I like about these fights against Blake and Yang is how they both try to give Adam an out, but he can't leave it alone. This is all he has left. Everything he built for himself has crumbled and he blames Blake for it. If he drops this, what is he going to do with himself? Adam is like Blake said back in Volume 5 about being spiked. He has to hurt her for how he feels she hurt him. In the end, he does hurt Blake by forcing her into a situation where, in the heat of the moment, she takes his life. Blake at one point did care about Adam. It was just her concerns always being ignored and how Adam grew more and more violent that drove Blake away from him. The stress of him constantly coming after her, leading up to this, coupled with her old feelings for him and the emotional trauma Adam put Blake through, comes to a head in this moment, causing Blake to break and crumble. Related to what I just said is something I really want to talk about, which is this exchange between Adam and Blake.
So I just wasn't good enough for you.
You know it's so much more than that.
There is so much more as to why Adam wasn't good enough. He never bothered to listen to Blake's concerns. He never came to her when she was clearly distressed or had something on her mind that is bothering her. You know who did? Team RWBY and Sun. In Volume 2, Weiss caught on to Blake regularly distancing herself early on. Weiss knows that something is bothering Blake and makes sure that Blake keeps the promise she made at the end of Volume 1. Her teammates all saw how Blake's obsessiveness is causing a clear detriment to her health and performance. RWBY and Weiss want her to go to the upcoming dance as a way for her to relax and revitalize herself. It isn't until Yang intervenes and approaches Blake calmly, honestly, and then sternly, followed by compassion, that Blake calms down and goes to the dance. In Volume 3, Blake makes her concerns and how she feels about Yang attacking Mercury known to Yang, comparing it to her experiences with Adam. Yang properly listens to what Blake has to say, even though it hurts Yang to know that someone she cares about doesn't initially believe her. Move to Volume 4, and we have Sun standing in for Yang to back up Blake. He may have misunderstood what Blake's intentions were, but him being there helped Blake understand the pain she induces on those she cares about when she blows them off and speaks like she doesn't want to be around them anymore. Blake fully admits in this scene how much she has grown to love RWBY, Weiss, and Yang. They all care about her. Adam never did.
Oh yeah, by the way, Adam's brand scar came out of nowhere and should have been hinted at towards the end of Volume 5 or during the Adam short.
We return you now to your regularly scheduled program.
That just leaves talking about the Adam and White Fang storylines in general. And there's only one question that needs to be answered. Were both of these things mishandled? Abso-fucking-lutely. When it comes to Adam, he was absolutely mishandled. But I say this only because of how they failed to address all of Adam's conflicts that were established by the end of Volume 3. You see, I actually really liked what happened with Adam at the end of Volume 3. They established him as a legitimate threat and set in stone what his conflicts were going to be with Blake moving forward. And I was really looking forward to how those conflicts were going to play out. The conflicts that were established between Blake and Adam were a personal conflict and a world conflict. their personal conflict obviously coming from their relationship, and the world conflict coming from their differing views on human-Faunus relations. Blake wants there to be equality and peace between the races, however, Adam believes it is impossible. What I love about this is how their stances and how strongly they believe them are symbolized in the animation. When Blake outlines her wants, she is on her knees, below Adam, and her shots are weak and thus don't connect. At this point of the story, she still hasn't figured out a way to fully address these issues and attain such goals. On the other hand, Adam stands tall, above Blake, and easily blocks her shots, showing how firm and unmoving he is in his beliefs. Obviously, Blake and Adam's personal conflict is resolved at the end of Volume 6, but their world conflict wasn't. Adam hadn't been proven wrong about his beliefs for human-Faunus relations before he died, and Blake hasn't figured out how to address these issues any more than she did before. Blake has made some strides, but she has not made enough progress to say Adam is wrong. Before moving to the White Fang section of this, I feel that I do need to address a few more things regarding Adam and his character. A lot of people have expressed their complaints about clear changes in Adam's character between Volumes 2 and 3. I get what they are saying, but I don't really agree with them. The main idea is how people believed Adam to be a morally ambiguous freedom fighter character who truly cares about the Faunus and their plight and was forced to work with Cinder and contribute to her plans. People considering him to be a morally ambiguous character due to his cause and actions, saying that he cares about the Faunus due to his one line when he is denying Cinder's request for his involvement in her plans during the flashback, feeling that he was forced into doing all of this by Cinder. When it comes to Adam being a morally ambiguous character, I just don't see it. If he was, I would expect to see some internal conflict, deliberation, or some level of him being unsure of himself in regards to what he is doing to fulfill his goals and push the cause he is a part of. But there isn't. When Blake lets Adam know her concerns for the other passengers and workers of the train he plans to put charges on, he quickly dismisses it with a, "What about them?" This tells us that Adam is willing to cause unnecessary harm in pursuit of his goals. There's nothing ambiguous about this, and is what bothers Blake the most, causing her to sever her connections with him and the White Fang. Adam being considered as someone who cares about the Faunus, and especially those under him, I find to be contradicted by the events of Volume 2. Adam has given authority to Cinder and her group over the members of the White Fang he is in charge of. With that authority, they are able to give orders, execute deserters, and use them for whatever at the cost of those members' lives. What does Adam say when Cinder's group acknowledges how what has transpired will make it hard for those remaining members to even listen to them anymore? No.
But they'll listen to me.
This immediately goes against what people point to as proof of his care. At the same time, it is also true to what he says. He wasn't willing to risk their lives for Cinder's cause, a human cause. But what if it was a cause that he was ultimately down for, as it could help further his own? This leads me to the idea of how Adam was forced to join Cinder and assist in her plans. This is again a read I understand, but is missing or ignoring things. As the end of Volume 2 with Adam's statement shows, he is fully on board and almost equal to Cinder and her group. If he was truly forced against his will to be a part of this, then Adam would show some sort of resentment and frustration towards Cinder and his involvement in her plans. But there isn't. What this means is that Cinder didn't really force Adam to be a part of her plans. It is more that she forced him into a position to listen to what she has to say and offer, since he didn't want to before. Of course, Adam flinching to Cinder's show of power puts cracks into what I'm saying here. But I do hope you also at least understand what I am getting at here. Because outside of this moment, there is no indication of Adam being frustrated at his involvement in Cinder's plans. If Adam was forced to do so against his will, then there would therefore be moments showing this resentment and or frustration by Adam towards Cinder, her group, and who she represents in the series both prior and after this scene was shown. The only other bit that people point out as a clear change in contradiction to what was established between Volumes 2 and 3 is Adam and Blake's relationship. Their relationship being a Blake the Apprentice and Adam the Mentor relationship up to Volume 2, Then Volume 3 turned that relationship into a previously romantic relationship, turned abusive, and then an ex with Adam becoming obsessive over Blake. This is another one of those points that I totally get, especially the Adam being suddenly obsessive over Blake part. But there are aspects about this that I find left out once again. The claim that Adam was just a mentor to Blake makes me want to give it the stink eye and respond to Blake calling Adam that in Volume 2 with a John Cena, "Are you sure about that?" This is because of Adam reaching out his hand to Blake as she leaves in the Black trailer, and the fact that Blake has a drawing of Adam in her notebook at the start of Volume 2, the latter of which is a romance trope to show fixation or longing for the one being drawn.
I missed you too.
This is all to say that Blake definitely had stronger feelings for Adam that went a little further beyond him just being a mentor to her. There is a quote from Monty that has been making the rounds in some circles, being used as a smoking gun to prove Adam was intended to just be a mentor to Blake. What's been shared around is this from an interview from Monty.
She's the apprentice.
What I found suspicious is how this was being shared with no additional context. So I watched the surrounding conversation to get the context to why Monty said this. Here's that context.
My favorite thing about the Black trailer is she seemingly takes a back seat in terms of action, but the show isn't entirely action. And she's doing great actions, but I framed it, I shot it in a way where she's almost like she's the apprentice, but she makes a bigger statement by the end of the trailer with her words. And by saying goodbye, the trailer became about her. We knew it was the Blake trailer. It was called the Blake trailer. It opened up with her and it ended with her. What you would think is the meat of the trailer was focused on the second character, but you know, the trailer passed on from being action to being about her character. And so that was the best thing about doing it. That's why it's my favorite one.
So, the quote from Monty is not him confirming what Blake's actual relationship with Adam is. He is talking more about the role Blake is playing in the story of the Black trailer by following Adam's lead and Adam having the big action moments. Her important actions and statements making the trailer more about her than Adam in the end. To give credit to one thing, there really wasn't any setup for Adam's creepy obsession over Blake that was shown in their confrontation in Volume 3. There's no denying that. The best I can say is that Adam probably did care that Blake left, and used his responsibilities with the White Fang as a way to distract him from her. This scene paralleling Yang's reaction to Blake leaving at the end of the same volume. Not enough to say he is obsessed with Blake, but somewhat enough to say that he may have been bothered by her leaving. The last bit to talk about when it comes to criticisms regarding Adam's character is how he is someone who fights back against oppressors and is made to be an abuser. This being something that just doesn't gel well on a writing standpoint and sends a horrible message. I will say that there is merit to these statements, but the former is something I don't agree with. I think Adam, being someone who fights oppressors and is an abuser himself to Blake, could have possibly worked. I can even use a contemporary example in media through My Hero Academia and Endeavor. Endeavor to the public is a hero. Endeavor in private to his family is an abusive monster. Endeavor is the number 2 hero when we first meet him, but the difference between his and Adam's introduction is that we are introduced to Endeavor through Todoroki's eyes. We quickly learn how absolutely abusive Endeavor is to his son and wife and what that caused. And I gotta say, My Hero Academia does some work to make Endeavor reflect on his actions and try to make amends. One of the things that I think is important when talking about Adam's character and the verified and perceived changes that I don't think has ever been brought up is his actual character design. Specifically, one aspect of it. I've heard in passing that a good character design represents aspects of that character. The aspect of Adam's character design that I think is important to bring up when talking about his character is how his design has him wear a mask, this being an iconic part of his design. Why this is important is because Adam is the only named character introduced early on in RWBY who wears a mask, or at least has part of their face obscured. The only other characters like that are Raven and Roman Torchwick due to his hair. Roman's hair doesn't really convey the same thing I'm about to get into, as it is actually a part of his body and not something he wears like Raven and Adam do with their masks. I've talked about something similar before back in my videos for Volume 4 with the Organization 13 Black Coat for Kingdom Hearts 2. What I said is that there are stages to the coat and what each of those stages mean. That being that when the hood is on and the face obscured, we don't really know what this person is about and what they want or are after. Once the hood is off and their face is revealed, we have at that point understood more about this person and what their goals are. And after the coat is discarded, it means that the person who discarded it no longer has anything to hide. This, I feel, is something that still holds true today. So, with Adam wearing a mask, it should have immediately communicated to the viewer that any information about and from Adam, even anything inferred, be taken with a grain of salt, as there may be aspects about that information or what was deduced that isn't true. Of falling for the mask that hides the truth behind it. Yeah, this can even apply to the things I've said and will say about him in this video. This makes Blake and Adam's confrontation in Volume 3 our true introduction to his character. A metaphorical mask off, if you will. That's why the scenes of Blake talking about her opinion of what Adam is has changed over time in Volume 5, and Yang saying the following in Volume 6 is important.
You know, she made a promise to me once that she'd always be at my side. And look how well she's kept it.
Did she make that promise to you? Or to the person you were pretending to be?
So I know, Carrie, that you rely very heavily on using the eyes for character performance to get a lot of emotions across.
It's honestly, it's more expressive than the mouths most of the time.
Yeah, no, which, Windows of the Soul, et cetera,
Exactly,
great.
yeah.
So, and you keep getting frustrated by how you think Adam's performance doesn't ever come across how it works in your head because you can't see his eyes and the mask is really frustrating you, and you don't like how the mouths work, particularly on the older characters. Adam's been around for ever since the Black trailer.
He's the third model.
Black trailer that we just did a shout out to.
Yeah. But I think that's why it works that much more for him.
Sure, yeah.
Is because you're denied the ability to see his eyes, and we do these extreme close-ups, and all you get is his there's the mask.
There's something very cold about just seeing this mask.
And he also represents the Faunus, for better or worse, and he's actually that inhuman.
Yeah.
And you don't get to see his eyes. It's you know what? Hey, it's just not coming to me. It's the alien from Aliens.
Oh, there you go.
That's Scott and H.R. Giger, however you pronounce it, and how they go out of their way to make sure that you can't see its eyes, and it just made it that much.
It was one of the things that we did with Locust and choosing that helmet was like,
oh
it's
yes, it
super
all
creepy.
comes together.
Yeah.
I feel confident enough to say that there was a through line for Adam during the first 3 volumes. In Volume 2, Blake references Adam with her response to Sun calling the wearing of grim masks as kinda dark. Then, Blake saying that Adam, her oldest partner, turned into a monster. And finally, Adam showing how dark and monstrous he is at the end of Volume 3. Carrie and Miles even discuss in the commentary of Volume 3 that Adam was, at the time, their darkest character, and that people don't yet realize how creepy Adam is. The commentary for this episode was recorded before episode 11 of Volume 3 even aired.
Hello, handsome.
Adam in the show proper.
Oh my god. People
Shout out to
have.
Garrett.
I'm still excited because
Garrett
like
Hunter.
episode 10 just came out. 11 hasn't come out
Yeah.
yet. They have no idea how creepy this guy is.
Well, I think it's interesting to see. And
Adam's probably one of the
then they're gonna
darkest
see
characters
a
we have
lot
in
of
this
it.
show,
Yeah.
at least that we've seen so far.
I think Adam is probably one of the darkest characters we have, and I think, without getting into it, because we didn't get into it too much, Mercury is probably one of the darkest backstories.
Yeah.
Out of everybody.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it comes down to the fact that the way Monty, Miles, and Carrie were creating and writing characters early on may have really bit them in the ass with Adam. That's being specifically how they were creating characters in a way that reveals them to be more or less different from their initial appearances, more than what they first appear to be. Adam, very clearly, being way different than a very vocal section of the audience expected him to be. A similar thing happened for Weiss that Monty, Miles, and Carrie also acknowledged in the Volume 1 commentary.
Funny, people are picking up on that stuff too.
Yeah, I feel like it almost took a little bit for time for the audience to actually trust us. To a certain point, like because we put out the trailers a good bit of time before the actual show came out, and I feel like everybody got kind of like their own impression of the character, whether it was right or wrong.
Especially
from the
for Weiss, yeah.
Especially for Weiss, yeah. I mean, when you talk about the, putting one-dimensional characters or seemingly one-dimensional characters out there and it being risky, that was kind of what happened first with Weiss, where we put her out there and everybody was like, oh, this is what you're gonna do with her. But that's my internet voice. But as the season goes on, I think she probably has one of the biggest developments of all the characters.
I believe that some would consider Adam akin to an unearned twist villain. I'm thinking of that one prick from Frozen as a good example. So I also wanted to talk about Adam by comparing him to other characters written in a similar way. I had a set of characters I wanted to use for comparison and initially decided on Eddie's brother from Ed, Edd and Eddy in the Big Picture Show movie. After watching the episodes about Eddie's brother, I realized that this comparison isn't that good, as there are plenty of warning signs that indicate how much bad news Eddie's brother is, despite how much Eddie sings his praises. One of the other characters I thought about making a comparison to Adam with was Hody Jones from One Piece, but I decided that this wouldn't be a good comparison to how Adam was written, although Hody does share Adam's superiority complex over humans and his wish to subjugate humans. So, the character of comparison I opted for here is early Jet from The Last Airbender. Jet is introduced and presented like people wanted Adam to be, a charismatic freedom fighter fighting against oppressors, which in this case is the Fire Nation. Aang and Katara really start to like Jet and what he is doing. Katara can even relate to Jet because Jet lost his family to the Fire Nation, just like Katara lost her mother. But they have no idea the level of hatred Jet has for the Fire Nation and what that hatred makes him willing to do. When they realize what Jet is planning and how it will kill more people than just the occupying Fire Nation, Katara is in such disbelief that she finds it to be an absolute betrayal of her trust, especially since Jet lied to her in order to get her to cooperate. Katara even calls Jet sick. That feeling of betrayal, I think, is at the root of why people responded so negatively to Adam's character at the end of Volume 3. This also contributes to how Adam was mishandled. People do not like it when they feel like they've been led on, had the rug pulled out from under them, or have promises made that are not kept or are just completely broken. It makes it feel like they were lied to or manipulated into believing something only to be punished for it. When it comes to the White Fang storyline and how it was mishandled, I think my confusion by what was initially presented in the Adam character short is indicative of why. It all just boils down to one thing. I just don't understand them enough. I get why they started resorting to violence when violence was necessary, but how did that happen? How did they get to that point? What were the series of events that led up to that? I understand what Gira and Sienna wanted and the actions they took to gain them. I even understand some of how Gira feels and thinks about Sienna and her tactics. But I know nothing about how Sienna feels and thinks about Gira and his methods. I don't even know what Blake thinks about Sienna. I don't even know if Blake has ever met Sienna before. I just wish we got to explore the layers and history of the White Fang more while they were still relevant to the story. What was Gira able to accomplish during his time with the White Fang? Why did Gira have problems that prevented him from making enough progress that also caused him to want to step down? Were those problems the reason why Sienna took the White Fang in a more violent direction? What about any members who were left over from Gira's time as leader? Is Saber someone who was a member during Gira's time and left with him? I feel like so many people would be cool with the White Fang if they were explored more and not all just left as evildoers that had to be stopped. Like, what if we got more of this?
Mata? Please, stop this.
Instead, most of the time, anyone wearing the White Fang uniform and mask is just some bad person who has to be stopped, and it doesn't matter if they die. This being further contributed by the fact that they are just mooks to fight due to the fact that they are visually designed like basic video game enemies seen in some JRPGs like the Tales series of video games. There are also other armed groups in RWBY that are given the same design philosophy and fulfill the same role, which is different from how the generic human enemies are designed in the Tales JRPGs I mentioned, as their entire face is usually completely covered by a helmet. Now, the White Fang has been compared to another group that uses violence against their oppressors in US history called the Black Panther Party. This is deservedly so. It has also been brought up how the White Fang, which seems to take influence from the Black Panther Party, is actually nothing like them due to differences in actions, the actual good they were able to accomplish, and who they took up arms against. I think I have found out the reason why. So here's a little side-by-side for you.
Universal Environmental Protection Society?
More like environmental terrorists. They're called the Space Warriors. Used to be a good group of dedicated people working to preserve the environment and protect endangered species. They did great work all around the asteroids. But a few years ago, a new leader took over the group and everything changed. Most of the members dropped out. Those who are left are more violent than the local crime syndicates. They have a special thing for the Ganymede sea rats. And guess who's in charge of these psycho-terrorists? Twinkle Maria Murdoch.
Please do not associate us with common terrorists. We are warriors of peace fighting a noble battle for the law of nature.
So, I feel it is safe for me to say that the White Fang is the way that it is in RWBY, not as some bastardization of an activist group in US history, but was made this way due to the influences of a fictional activist group turned terrorist organization found in one of the most influential anime of all time. You can take this as you will, and do understand that what I've shown here is just my own observation, and I have not found an official source yet that confirms what I just said. This just seems to be the most likely when considering how Cowboy Bebop can be found to have influenced RWBY in other ways, such as story beats and fight choreography. Now, there are very clear differences between the two that makes the implementation of this potential influence in RWBY not all that well thought out, if it is the case. The big one being that the group described in Cowboy Bebop is a bounty of the week, villainous organization that has no bearing on the plot and characters of the show, and thus are only ever important for just this one episode. So, it works because it is a one and done deal. RWBY, however, has the White Fang be an ongoing antagonistic force that is important to our understanding of the world and how the plot of the show progresses. Therefore, the White Fang would need to be expanded upon much more than its influential counterpart. As I mentioned at the start of this section, we don't really come to understand the White Fang and its history and remnant as much as we should have. Now, there are two things I want to point out and briefly talk about when it comes to racism in RWBY: exposure and respect. And I'm going to use two TED Talks I've watched over the last few years to highlight them. First of which, exposure, is something I wrote about on Tumblr some number of years ago. People have pointed out how Weiss got over bigotry way too fast, but I think that downplays the benefits of exposure. To me, Weiss's bigotry and prejudice of the White Fang and, by proxy, the Faunus, is her using them as a scapegoat. Something to blame for how parts of her childhood went. So now, she's exposed to Blake, who calls out her bigotry and forces Weiss to come to terms with her preconceptions. Is this well executed? No, but RWBY IQ actually takes some time to explore this effect on Weiss. So I don't think the quickness of Weiss's change of heart is the problem, as it just needed time to explore it. This last anecdote from the TED Talk by Christian Picciolini, sorry if I butchered that, shows how quickly one can connect with those whom they consider other or evil. We do get another example of what exposure can do through Roman Torchwick. This is the one I wrote about. When we are first introduced to Roman working with the White Fang, Roman is very openly hostile and discriminatory towards the members of the White Fang. By the end of Volume 2, we learned that Roman has formed a bit of a camaraderie with some of the White Fang members. So much so that he has also learned one of their names and is using it. His racist remarks even change from being in the White Fang's faces to behind their backs, and he apologizes after he is caught saying it. Respect is a different story. Respect is something that RWBY touches on, but never gets into. The TED Talk by Daryl Davis gets into what I feel is one of the missing aspects about RWBY's exploration about racism and how to deal with or mitigate it. What Daryl gets into about respect is that it has to go both ways. It cannot be one-sided. Both parties need to give each other respect in order for them to come to an understanding that will in turn remove hatred and fear. This is something I feel points out the potential and maybe even the actual problems with Gira and Sienna's methods when running the White Fang. For example, was the reason Gira had problems because he gave respect, but hardly ever asked for it in return? Was this why Sienna took the White Fang in a more violent direction and demanded respect, but never gave any in return? What could Blake learn from both of these methods and problems about respect? Something to think about. Before I leave these topics entirely, I want to say that I do believe that the creative heads, Monty, Carrie, and Miles, did have good intentions when designing and implementing a plot about racism into the story and ongoing narrative of RWBY. RWBY has themes of unity, coming together despite one's differences and backgrounds, and so on. So, to include a force that actively pushes against that, and have a significant member of that force be so against that notion is a decent idea. However, they ended up failing to give this subject matter the respect it deserves. This respect, I feel, would have been achieved if they did enough research on the topics they were going to be covering, and that they also consulted with people or groups that are more knowledgeable on these subjects than they are. I feel they did do an amount of research, but they either failed to properly understand what their research was telling them, didn't do enough research, or they needed to reach out to someone but didn't that can help them better understand and implement it into their story. The best example I can think of that did do this is the game developer Ninja Theory and their video game Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. This game tackled the subject of mental health through its protagonist Senua, who suffers from psychosis. Not only did they do their own research for this mental health issue, but they also reached out to health organizations who research and help treat this condition, and those who are affected by this condition. If you want to know how good of a job the development team at Ninja Theory handled this mental health subject matter in their game, you should check out the video Hellblade and Living with Psychosis by Leonardo da Vinci. For most of the series, Blake has been building a relationship with Sun. Sun has even met and interacted with Blake's parents, one of which approves and the other disapproves. This isn't to say that Blake has not been building a relationship with Yang, because they are building a relationship. It's just that so much time has been dedicated to Blake and Sun for 5 volumes that to go forward with Yang so quickly can be jarring. Now, I did talk about Blake and Yang back in my story video for Volume 6, but I only focused on the re-establishment of their relationship.
For Bumblby in Volume 6, there are 2 issues I have with how it was presented.
This moment where Yang grabs Blake by the hand, and this line from Adam.
What does she even see in you?
The reason I have a problem with Yang grabbing Blake by the hand is because it takes away from the moment where they stand their ground against Adam together. It just seems odd to me that they would have this happen when them holding hands becomes an important moment later on. If anything, Yang should have grabbed Blake by the arm to pull her away. This way, there is at least an arc going from Yang pulling away her hand from Blake to Yang allowing Blake to connect with her. As for the line from Adam, the problem is how I don't understand where this line is coming from. Essentially, why is Adam saying this? What did Adam see that would cause him to say this line? When did he see it? I don't have definitive answers to these questions. I can provide answers, but each doesn't give a complete explanation. Why is Adam saying this? Well, it's easily because he can tell that Blake has an interest in Yang and may have seen signs pointing to that. But then comes the next questions. What did Adam see, and when did he see it? First would have to be when Adam fought Blake and then cut off Yang's arm. He told Blake that he will destroy everything she loves, starting with Yang. Except there's no hint of jealousy like there is with the line in question. Going further into the series, Adam shows no signs of caring about how Blake feels about Yang. We know Blake and Yang have scenes about their relationship in Volumes 4 and 5, but Adam isn't there for any of them. Adam doesn't even acknowledge that Yang is there while at Haven. This just leaves Volume 6. We know Adam was following Blake up to the train. This means that he may have seen Blake and Yang's interaction about the bag, but this wouldn't be a definitive moment for Adam to see Blake's feelings for Yang. After the train, Adam is just waiting for Blake and Argus. This means he couldn't have seen what went down between Blake and Yang while on the farm. Once Blake and Yang arrive in Argus, there isn't a moment between the two of them that Adam could see and explain the line. That just leaves Blake looking at Yang, which infuriated Adam, making him unleash a giant semblance-powered blast wave at Yang. I can see this being a moment that can act as an explanation for the line. but I would want something more to build up to it. Now, if you remember my video discussing the story for Blake and Yang, and what I would add to make the re-establishment of their relationship better, I mentioned how having a scene in episode 9 between Blake and Yang about their relationship while they are out looking for Oscar would set up their declaration to Adam among other things. Adam's line is that other thing I alluded to. Since Adam is waiting for Blake in Argus, he would be stalking Blake while she is out looking for Oscar with Yang. Therefore, Adam would see this moment of Blake and Yang coming to an understanding and get frustrated. Seeing them looking at each other again in his fight with Blake and Yang and getting angry would therefore have precedence. Thus, better setting up the line declared by Adam when it is down to just him and Yang. So yeah, those are the two issues I had with the implementation of Bumblby in RWBY Volume 6. One is small, but significant enough for me to mention it, while the other is kinda big, at least to me. I might as well touch on how things go in Volumes 7 and 8. I would have to say that there was much to be desired here when it comes to development of Blake and Yang's relationship in a romantic way. After all, I see Volume 6 as them re-establishing their relationship and would want to see how it progresses after that point. I love that Blake catches Yang staring at her and how embarrassing or semi-awkward it is for the both of them. I also love how they have a conversation about what went down with Adam. I just wish there were some scenes exploring more about how they feel about each other and maybe even what they want out of their relationship. For example, I wish we actually got to see them do their double date with Flint and Neon at the club in Mantle. I would love to see Neon pushing Blake's buttons about Yang, because Neon is really good at that, but not actually in a mean-spirited way. Then for Volume 8, you got Yang wondering how Blake might think less of her for not helping out with Amity, and how this doesn't get a follow-up once Yang and Blake reunite. Yang even mentions that she had a conversation with Blake about the Hound when talking to RWBY after RWBY stormed off. Wish we could have seen that conversation and what it could have fully entailed. Here's hoping that Volume 9 gets into these sorts of things that Volumes 7 and 8 didn't. What I want to end on here is why I think moving with Yang and Blake in a romantic way actually works. The big thing to me is that Yang is a parallel to Adam. Both are violent, aggressive people, have similar semblances in which the more they absorb, the more they can dish out, and are initially established partners for Blake. Partners obviously not being used in the romantic sense here. Blake even takes Yang's moment of perceived unnecessary violence against Mercury in Volume 3 and compares it to Adam's increasingly violent behavior. There's even more comparison that can be drawn between Yang and Adam in Volume 3 due to how they are both given a scene showing their reactions to Blake leaving them. The big difference is that when it comes to discussing one's problems about what the other or themselves are doing, Adam doesn't listen while Yang does. This is seen when comparing Adam's conversations with Blake in the Black trailer and the Adam short to Yang's conversations with Blake in Volumes 2, 3, and 7. Jaune has been a favorite character of mine for RWBY ever since Volume 1. I felt like he's had one of the most interesting journeys as a character that came to a head in Volume 6. So I'd like to take the time to go over Jaune's journey while still within the context of Volume 6 in this video. Jaune in Volume 1 can come across as pretty unlikable due to his unsavory, selfish behavior when it comes to Weiss and his initial actions during initiation. This all stems from his intrinsic goal to become a huntsman and be like the celebrated warriors of his family and ancestors. But because of his lack of ability, he has to cheat his way into Beacon in order to even start achieving that goal. This goal causes him to adopt a macho mindset that can devolve into a toxic masculinity at times. Jaune is behaving this way because he has put it in his head that this is what a celebrated hero would be like. The thing that saves Jaune from all of this selfish bravado is the fact that this is a facade, an act he is putting on. When it matters, Jaune will drop this facade and put others over himself. And it is through the help of RWBY and Pyrrha that Jaune starts to move away from it. Jaune finally moving to become a better leader, fighter, and person. Come Volume 2, Jaune retains that selfish behavior of trying to ask out Weiss. One can say that it is admirable and cute that he keeps trying and failing to court Weiss. But it is clear that Weiss isn't interested and can find Jean's occasional attempts to ask her out as a nuisance. This fixation causes him to not notice what is going on with Pyrrha. Pyrrha's interest in Jean is because of how she feels that she can make a legitimate connection with him. Pyrrha's status and accomplishments have caused a sort of emotional chasm to form between her and her peers. Thus, because of how Jean didn't know who she was when initially meeting her, Pyrrha felt that this was her chance to not have her status negatively impact a potential relationship. The problem for Pyrrha is that she is completely selfless, detrimentally so. Pyrrha puts the wants and needs of others over her own. Since Jean is interested in Weiss and not her, why would she try to change or pursue him if that is what he wants? With Pyrrha's advice, he tries to ask out Weiss again, only to find that she is trying to ask out Neptune to the dance. With this, Jean finally gives up. It hurts him, but this is truly for the best. Once Jean approaches Pyrrha at the dance, he finally learns about what has been bothering Pyrrha and what she hoped for with him. He finally realizes that his pursuit of Weiss has caused him to ignore the trouble his partner and teammate is going through, and moves to make it right by owning up to a promise he made to Pyrrha about wearing a dress if she didn't get a date to the dance. With this, all of Jean's negative traits and behaviors are gone, or at least mitigated. Jean now fully bettering as a person by learning to support and be there for others like they were for him. We see this when he catches on to how Pyrrha is troubled in Volume 3. Jean tries to talk to her about it, but because he doesn't understand the context of her situation, ends up making it worse. What's great is how he blames himself and not Pyrrha for how things went down. Things get worse for Jean as he comes to learn what Pyrrha has become a part of. He's confused and tries to ask Pyrrha about it. Unfortunately, Cinder has defeated Ozpin and is moving to the top of the tower, which Ozpin told Pyrrha that the tower cannot fall. Pyrrha realizes what she is going to have to do and how dangerous it will be. She goes to do the most selfish thing she has ever done: kiss Jean and send him away to safety. Jean calls Weiss and begs her and RWBY to save Pyrrha. They don't make it in time. Pyrrha's death has a negative effect on Jean, as it should. This brings back to his negative selfish behavior, but in a different way. Jean is now more prone to anger and taking it out on anyone who causes it, seen with Crow, Cinder, and Oscar. His outburst against Cinder and charging at her in order to get revenge for Pyrrha put everyone at risk. His remark on how his life doesn't matter, even though it is an indication of how little he values himself now, is what prompted Cinder to attack Weiss. In his desperation to save Weiss, he unlocks his semblance, a power that transfers his own aura to amplify and support another's. A power that is selfless and not selfish. A power that exemplifies how Jean is at his best supporting others. That doesn't mean that Jean's issues are gone now that he has this power. Jean is still prone to getting angry and taking it out on the source. Seen with Oscar when Jean learns about what went down with Oz after the team separated. I already talked about how Jean's conversation with the red-haired woman helps him realize what it means to be a huntsman. It's his conversation with Ren and Nora, though, that helps him move away from his self-destructive behavior. Jean initially tries to apologize for his behavior by saying how terrible he has been as a leader and a friend, but Ren cuts him off and essentially tells him that he needs to stop belittling or hating himself. Nora lets Jean know that they heard what he had said to Cinder and that they both love him just like they did Pyrrha. Ren adds how they don't want to lose him too. Jean's anger has come from how little he values himself after Pyrrha's death. This is why most conversations involving her, Oz, and Cinder have either brought this out of him or sets him off. It's a reminder of his inadequacy, which is why it is important that Nora and Ren told Jean how much they care about him. You know, most of what I've said is not actually why I initially got so interested in Jean. I don't think very highly of myself. I consider myself to be the bottom of the barrel. Everyone around me is so much better at all the things I do. Like, I'm dealing with some major imposter syndrome right now when it comes to my skills as a programmer, despite graduating with a bachelor's in computer science. This is why I regularly find myself getting interested in the stories of characters who are not as good as their peers. Thinking of characters like Joey Wheeler from Yu-Gi-Oh! And Aoi Fukasaku from Coppelion. A more recent example I watched that actually put forth an alternative to my feelings of inadequacy is Pet Girl of Sakura So, with the characters Rita and Sarada. Rita is how I currently feel and could end up as. Rita gave up on her artistry because of regular comparisons to her better peer. Sarada, on the other hand, gets to see the work all the geniuses around him put into their craft, and that ultimately inspires him to keep going and try to get better. He does have to deal with the crushing reality of how his better peers can inadvertently take out the wind from his sails. This is why that inadequacy I just mentioned is something I wish they explored more with Jaune. I've spoken and written about how I wish there was a scene between Jaune and RWBY back in Volume 4 about what happened with Pyrrha. Like, during this conversation, Jaune could blame himself for Pyrrha's death, as he feels his inadequacy is what prompted Pyrrha to send him away to safety, feeling as though he wasn't good enough to fight by her side when she needed him most. This being why he trains on his own in the middle of the night, so he never has to experience that feeling again. The feeling that someone had to die because he wasn't good enough for anything else to happen. It's a good thing I waited before talking about Cinder and Neo, as I didn't really have anything to say when I started this series of videos. Previously, I would have said that this is just setting things up for the Atlas arc of the story, and it is weird that Cinder knows that Neo should be targeting RWBY for the altercation Neo and Roman had with RWBY in Volume 3. With the release of Roman Holiday, and Volume 8 showcasing Cinder's backstory, I now have some talking points. For Neo, let's just say that I'm intrigued with what Volume 9 and later volumes might do with her. I don't think she will get a full redemption, but I don't expect that she will die. There are also things said in the Reddit AMA for Roman Holiday that I wonder if they are going to address or utilize for Neo in future installments. For Cinder, I gotta say, Volume 6 is where they should have started hinting at Cinder's backstory. The first section of the backstory shown in Volume 8 starts with Cinder at an orphanage and being adopted, or purchased rather. This section should have been shown before Cinder wakes up in Episode 2 of Volume 6, and then have the rest of the backstory shown in Volume 8. This is because I think the first section of the backstory happens in Anima, the continent that Mistral is a kingdom of. And then the backstory finishes with the last section after Cinder loses to Penny. This change is because of how both of these moments would be after Cinder loses to another maiden. I would also include how Cinder met Salem for the rest of the backstory in Volume 8. I don't understand why they didn't include that in the backstory they showcased in Volume 8, as I think that is the most important to help us understand how Cinder got here. So now to talk about some random things I hadn't in any of the previous videos. This is going to be rapid fire since I don't want this video to be longer than it probably already is. I think the brother gods are shown to be hypocritical on purpose, since they mentioned in the commentary that Greek gods and similar mythology were the influence. I think I get what they were going for. Godly beings that are flawed and make mistakes. I love seeing just how absolutely terrified Emerald is of Salem now that Cinder isn't around. It's also nice to learn more about Mercury and what he went through. Music-wise, things are alright, not a lot to my taste, but the music does when it needs to. I do like how they change up the theme for the God of Light from his introduction to his arrival at the God of Darkness's domain. I think it was said that Casey even contributed to some of the score for Episode 3 in the commentary. We got quite a lot when it comes to Salem and Oz's history. I especially like the superiority complex Salem has over the current iteration of humanity. We see this complex come into play in Volume 8 when Salem refers to Emerald's semblance as little, in such a scathing, biting tone.
You really have been honing that semblance of yours.
I also want to point out some little things I noticed while rewatching Volume 6 for this video. I find it funny to see Yang do a little twitch of her leg because of what was said in the commentary back in Volume 1.
Peanut butter.
Yeah,
He's bleeding internally.
Jam at this point.
Oh, speaking of bleeding internally, hi Pyrrha.
It's like Adam the animator, Adam Mark was like, please have her not be dead. Just add a little bit of movement, because it looks like she's bought it.
I really like the touch of Weiss carefully taking steps down this slope of snow. I really want to know the mad lads who thought of and did this. Reddit seemed to like it. Shout out to Blake looking over at Yang and then away at the start of episode 6 because of the fallout of their conversation in the prior episode. The two Atlas guards who are essentially the hype men for Cordovan remind me of the two guard characters that were seen in Bleach when they arrive at Kukaku Shiba's house. Next is something I can't believe I didn't notice before. Little Miss has her weapon and spider aesthetic come from Soul Eater through the witch Arachne. Weapon is the fan, and Little Miss uses people she refers to as her spiders to gather information. Here's something some of you may not have noticed about the Cinder vs. Neo fight. When Cinder kicked Neo and then jumped up to the ceiling, Cinder actually used her foot to briefly pin Neo's arm down before jumping off her. You know, people would think that this is an unassuming volume going into it, and would be similar to Volume 4, as Volume 6 is another travel volume between kingdoms. But this would be a wrong assumption. In Volume 6, most of the cast goes through a lot as they come to terms about their situation and themselves. We have the characters having to figure things out on their own after the safety net of their elders and trusted authority figures were lost. We get an exploration of the lore and backstory that set into motion the events of the series, making clear what the full stakes are going to be moving forward. We get a set of strong action sequences as well. It really feels like a lot went down throughout this volume despite it only taking place over the course of a week in-universe. This volume also cemented my wish that when RWBY is done, it gets a full video game adaptation in the style of the Tales series. This volume essentially acts as the midpoint of the game where the characters discover a revelation that upends their and our current understanding of their world and situation. Hell, 2 teams of 4? That lends itself extremely well to the party composition of Tales games. I think the time I've taken to cover this volume over the course of 5 videos these past 3 years goes to show how important it is for the story, characters, action, animation, and production of the series. Especially the production, as I had to make a 2-part design video to get into the design and intent of the show. I even took the time to go into the evolution of RWBY's special and visual effects over the years. When it comes down to it, I enjoyed Volume 6. I see it as a return to form while striving to do more, as I mentioned in my story video back in 2019. It has its problems, but it is absolutely superior to Volume 5 in every way. I'll give it a 4.1 out of 5. And with that, this 3-year journey has come to an end. I think I'm going to write a post to my Tumblr and Reddit about the kind of journey these series of videos for RWBY Volume 6 has been and what I'll be doing in the future. So please keep an eye out for that. That just leaves me with one more thing before officially ending this video. A question to you, the viewer, who has stuck around this long. What did you think of RWBY Volume 6? That's it. I've done it. I'm done. I'm free. I'm finally free. Freedom!
What is that? I don't know. Alex, grab it. Grab it. I'm not gonna grab that. You grab it. Get it down!